Chapter 2 of Talking with Ted. Patch and I have worked up a good program tonight. We're going to talk about taxes, right, Patch? Because taxes is what has been harassing Homo sapiens ever since he first got organized, right, Patch? Okay, Patch, thanks a bunch. We're going to take it all the way back to Cain and Abel, poor fellows. Now, Abel was a pretty hard-working guy. He got into the grape business early and produced some wonderful kinds of grapes and had a big demand for them. So Cain thought, hey, I'll help you with selling these things. But he said, it's going to cost you a little bit. I'll have to stick a little tax on each bunch of grapes we sell. But both of us are going to make a lot of money doing this. And Abel said, hey, now wait a minute. I'm doing all the work, raising all these grapes, and you think you're helping me sell them, but I got a lot of customers, and I don't think I need you. Well, this made Cain pretty mad. He said, well, no, as your brother, you owe it to me to work with me in this new idea, and I'm going to exact that tax out of you, whatever. And when Abel objected some more, Cain got mad and killed him. Well, that's the way it's been with taxes ever since. Fight, fight, fight. But there are some practical things about taxes. Early in American history, the New Englanders were giving another George at that time a hard time about financing the French and Indian War. So George figured, come on, you guys, you got to help pay for this. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to tax the tea you buy from England. Well, the New Englanders didn't buy that at all. So they stormed the British tea ships that were in Boston Harbor and threw all the tea overboard and said to George, to hell with your tax, George. And then there was another George a little bit later on, President George Washington. And being a good soldier, he thought that the new country should pay what the Revolutionary War veterans were owed in back pay. But there was not enough money in the treasury. So one morning at prayer breakfast, he was talking with some of the religious right of the day, and they said, now George, we can do two things with one stone. We can get some tax money for you, and we can also tend to discourage this drunkenness that's destroying the fabric of our country. So we'll tax whiskey. Well, that didn't go over well at all, particularly with a fellow named Shea, who had one of the biggest distilleries in the area, and he was mad because this new tax only taxed hard liquor. It didn't tax the wine that the rich folks were drinking. And Shea didn't think that was a good idea, so he organized one hell of a big rebellion, and poor President Washington had to call out the National Guard to quell the rebellion and get peace established. Which reminds us of another general who became president, who had to call out the National Guard to quell the disturbances over trying to get black people into some good schools. And that was President Eisenhower. Now, let's go back to New England. I was born and raised in the state of Vermont, and Vermont had a long history of independence. The early settlers in Vermont came from Massachusetts and Connecticut because they couldn't get along with their neighbors, particularly when it came to questions about taxation. So they moved up to Vermont, which was not as heavily settled as Connecticut and Massachusetts, and they established their own governments and had their town meetings and agreed on moderate taxation. And one of the ways they dealt with this was to have a tax day, particularly in the spring. And the folks would get out with their wagons and their horses and their picks and shovels, and they'd repair the roads. and anybody who did this got credit on his tax bill. My grandfather, Edward Bruce Barrows, had an apple orchard in a little town in southern Vermont called Marlborough. And Edward was on the Board of Selectmen, which is similar to what we have out here in the West called the Board of Supervisors. So one time, the Board of Selectmen were approached by a new resident in town, a rich fellow from Montclair, New Jersey. At that time, there were a lot of abandoned farms in southern Vermont, and some of these rich people from Montclair, New Jersey would buy them up and fix them up for summer homes. And this worked out well. It kept the old buildings from falling down, brought in a little tax money to the town, and these, generally speaking, were pleasant folks. They loved Vermont and the hills. And sometimes it turned out that when these rich folks from Montclair, New Jersey retired, they decided to fix up these summer homes and make them year-round living. Well, one of these summer homes that was in the town where my grandfather was a selectman had to cross a creek. Back there they call them brooks. Out here we call them creeks. This was a shallow place, kind of gravelly, and you could get through it with a horse and buggy with no problem. And in those days, the automobiles were a little higher off the ground and a car could get through. But what would happen when we had a big rainstorm, or in the winter when there was heavy snow, you couldn't get across this ford with your automobile. So the summer folks who've now begun to settle there went to the Board of Selectmen and they said, "Fellas, we really need a bridge." Well, the selectmen thought about it and they said, "Yeah, I guess probably you do with your automobiles. It's not as convenient as with those of us who have horses and buggies and wagons." So they said, "Okay, we'll build your bridge." Well, the summer folks and the retired folks were just thrilled to pieces and couldn't wait to see the first work to begin on that bridge. And weeks went into months and months went into years and there was still no sign of the bridge. So they went back to the selectmen and they said, "Fellas, where's our bridge?" And the selectmen said, "Oh, don't worry. We're setting aside a little money every year from taxes and we're building a fund to build your bridge. And as soon as we get enough money, we'll build your bridge." Well, the new folks said, "But we want to be able to get to town any month of the year in any kind of weather, and we really need the bridge now. Why don't you borrow some money?" Well, there was a sudden stillness in the selectman's office, and they said, "What was that you said? Borrow some money to build a bridge? You folks must be crazy. Do you do things like that down in Montclair, New Jersey?" Well, the poor selectmen didn't know really what to do. They didn't want to be too mean to these folks, and these folks were paying taxes on farms that had been abandoned, which weren't paying any taxes while they were being abandoned. So the selectmen compromised and said, "Well, okay, we'll borrow enough money so that next year we can build you a bridge." Okay, folks, that finishes up for Chapter 2 on taxes. Appreciate your being with us. And we have a Chapter 3 coming up in the future that brings us up to date on this subject of taxes. Thanks a bunch and good night.